Okay, let's unpack this danking. For most of us, it evokes images of stability, security, maybe even a little bit of tradition.
Right. Rock solid. Dependable.
Exactly. Now imagine that same world suddenly embracing the fail fast mantra of Silicon Valley startups. It sounds like a fascinating collision of cultures, right?
Definitely a real clash.
So we're diving deep today into exactly that. JPMorgan Chase's ambitious experiment with a fail fast approach to innovation.
What's fascinating right from the start is this inherent friction. You're talking about a sector where a major misstep can have systemic consequences, where regulations are tight for a reason, and public trust is paramount.
Absolutely crucial.
Now, picture that sector deliberately trying to adopt a model where small, rapid failures are actually seen as, stepping stones to success. It's a bold gamble.
It really is. Our mission in this deep dive is to really get under the hood of JPMorgan Chase's fail fast strategy. We want to understand what drove them to it, what challenges they encountered along the way. And there were definitely some eye-opening moments. And ultimately, what the key takeaways are for anyone thinking about innovation in a big, complex organization.
Yeah.
We've analyzed articles and reports on their strategies to bring you the core insights. Think of this as your quick, expert briefing on a really interesting case study in modern business.
Precisely. Whether you're leading innovation initiatives, navigating change within your own organization, or maybe just curious about how different business philosophies clash and adapt, this exploration of JPMorgan Chase's journey offers a surprisingly insightful perspective on the balancing act required.
So let's get right to it. The why. Why would an institution as established and, frankly, as significant as JPMorgan Chase decide to embrace a philosophy that seems almost counterintuitive to the very nature of banking?
Well, if you connect this to the bigger picture, the motivation becomes much clearer. The financial services industry is in a state of constant evolution, facing pressure not just from, competing traditional banks.
The usual suspects.
Right, but also from a growing wave of agile tech companies moving into the financial space. Fintechs, basically.
Uh-huh.
So to remain competitive, rapid digital transformation isn't just an option, it's a necessity. And JPMorgan Chase, they recognize this urgency.
They saw the writing on the wall.
I think so. Their fail-fast strategy was essentially a bet on rapid adaptation as a core competitive advantage.
And they backed that bet in a big way, didn't they? We're talking about billions of dollars poured into technology annually, a clear priority under CEO Jamie Dimon's leadership.
Oh, absolutely. That level of leadership commitment was crucial. The core idea behind adopting fail fast was to cultivate a more agile, sort of startup-like culture within the organization.
Easier said than done in a giant bank, I imagine.
For sure.
Yeah.
But the goal was to lower the internal barriers to experimentation, empower teams to test new ideas quickly, and, accelerate the entire cycle of development and learning.
Oh.
This wasn't just abstract talk. It was put into practice within product development teams, dedicated internal incubators, almost like mini startups within the larger organization, given more autonomy to experiment.
That's little labs.
Kind of. And specialized units like Onyx, their team exploring technologies like blockchain and digital currencies, stuff behind Bitcoin and the like.
It sounds like they were aiming to be proactive, to not just react to change, but to maybe drive it.
I think that was the ambition.
And we did see some early successes, didn't we? Things like their mobile-first banking initiatives, the adoption of more sophisticated data analytics.
Yeah, and even some pioneering steps in the world of corporate blockchain. There was a palpable sense of early momentum.
Right.
The fundamental belief was that in a rapidly changing technological landscape, the ability to quickly test assumptions, learn from setbacks, and iterate rapidly wasn't just beneficial, it was vital for long-term survival and staying ahead of the competition. The mindset was very much about embracing bold experimentation.
So the ambition was clear, the investment was there. But as we'll see, translating that startup energy into a heavily regulated environment wasn't without its significant hurdles. Where did this startup model really start to collide with the realities of a global financial institution like JPMorgan Chase?
Well, this raises an important point about organizational culture. The shift towards embracing experimentation wasn't uniform across the vast organization. That's maybe predictable?
Probably. Different parts move at different speeds.
Exactly. While the technology-focused divisions often embrace this new way of working, the more traditional business units, with their established processes and, frankly, more risk-averse cultures, found it more challenging to adapt.
So you get misalignment.
Right. This internal difference created friction, misaligned priorities, and even some confusion about who ultimately held responsibility for the risks associated with these rapid experiments.
That makes perfect sense. A nimble startup can change direction almost instantly. A global bank with its intricate systems and regulatory obligations.
Hmm.
Well, not so much.
Not even close.
And the potential consequences of failure are on a completely different scale, aren't they? For a startup, failing fast might mean sunsetting an app, losing some VC money.
Yeah, disappointing maybe, but contained.
For a bank, it could trigger regulatory scrutiny, massive fines, or seriously erode hard-earned customer trust.
That's the core of the challenge. Unlike a startup where a failed experiment might mean a loss of investment, for JPMorgan Chase, failures carried much higher stakes. Regulatory compliance, potential financial penalties, and, critically, the potential damage to their reputation and the confidence of their customers.
Yeah, you just can't treat a major failure lightly when you're entrusted with people's money and, the stability of the financial system.
No way, the responsibility is immense.
And we saw a very public illustration of these risks with Finn, their mobile-only bank aimed at attracting younger customers. Remember that?
Oh yeah, Finn. Significant investment, a nationwide launch in 2018.
And then, poof, just a year later it was shut down. That's a pretty clear example of the potential downsides, isn't it?
Finn serves as a really telling case study. Substantial resources were invested in its development and marketing, yet it ultimately didn't resonate with a target audience and was discontinued relatively quickly.
Just didn't get traction.
Seems like it. And Finn wasn't entirely alone. Some of their blockchain initiatives, while ambitious, ultimately highlighted the challenge of finding really viable use cases within regulatory constraints.
So lots of effort, lots of investment.
Yeah, consuming significant investment over several years without delivering scalable commercial value. Same sometimes with certain AI projects, too. Difficult to get them off the ground in a compliant way.
And as these kinds of missteps occurred, the scrutiny intensified, didn't it? Regulators and shareholders probably started asking more pointed questions.
Exactly, you saw that happening. The initial positive sentiment around ambitious innovations started to be tempered by increasing pressure to demonstrate clear accountability and effective risk management.
So the honeymoon period was over.
You could say that. The fundamental tension we discussed earlier became even more pronounced. How do you foster a culture of rapid experimentation within the framework of a highly regulated and systemically important financial institution? It's a tough needle to thread.
So beyond the direct financial costs of these ultimately unsuccessful projects, what were the broader consequences for JPMorgan Chase, both internally with their employees and externally with their various stakeholders?
Well, internally, the rapid pace of prototyping and the frequent shifts in direction, it took a toll on employee morale in some areas.
I can imagine. Working hard on something that just gets shelved.
Right. Teams would invest significant effort into projects that were subsequently abandoned, leading to frustration and a sense of, wasted effort.
Demoralizing.
It can be. There was also sometimes a perception, maybe rightly or wrongly, that clear exit strategies and post-project reviews, post-mortems were lacking.
So not enough learning from the failures.
Or at least the learning wasn't always visible. And for some employees, this created an impression that innovation efforts were maybe being driven more by buzzwords or hype than by a well-defined strategic roadmap.
Right, chasing the next shiny object. And how did the investment community and their clients react to all this?
It was mixed. Initially, there was considerable praise for JPMorgan Chase's forward-thinking approach and their willingness to embrace new technologies. They looked like leaders.
Okay, so initial applause.
Yeah. But as the instances of high-profile project shutdowns increased, like with Finn, investors and analysts started to scrutinize the return on these substantial technology investments more closely.
Show us the money, basically.
Pretty much. Questions began to arise about whether the bank was effectively translating these investments into sustainable growth and tangible financial benefits. The ROI question.
And it wasn't just the investors raising eyebrows, was it?
No.
You mentioned earlier that some of their corporate and institutional clients also had concerns.
That's a really important distinction. For JPMorgan Chase's large corporate and institutional clients, think big companies. Other financial firms' reliability and long-term stability are absolutely paramount.
Non-negotiable, really.
Totally. They expressed concerns about the potential volatility and lack of long-term support for some of these newer technological tools being rolled out.
Like, is this cool new platform still going to be here next year?
Exactly that kind of worry. For these clients, knowing that a technology partner will be there and the solutions will be consistently supported often outweighs the allure of the newest, most cutting-edge features. Novelty in this context sometimes took a backseat to dependability. Trust is key.
So JPMorgan Chase found itself in a delicate balancing act, trying to project an image of a leading-edge tech innovator while simultaneously reassuring its core stakeholders that it remained a stable and dependable financial institution. That sounds like a real tightrope walk.
It is indeed, and their experiences offer some really valuable lessons, I think. Not just for other financial institutions navigating this same terrain, but really for any large, established organization grappling with the need to innovate in a rapidly evolving landscape.
Okay, let's distill those lessons down. What are the key takeaways from JPMorgan Chase's journey with the fail-fast philosophy, warts and all?
Well, firstly, their experience really highlights the critical need to strike the right balance. It's about balancing agile principles, speed, iteration with strong governance and risk management frameworks.
You can't just copy-paste from a startup.
Exactly. These frameworks need to be specifically adapted to the unique regulatory environment and the inherent risks associated with a large, regulated institution. You absolutely cannot simply transplant a startup culture wholesale without considering these crucial differences.
Okay, so tailor the approach. What else?
Innovation in this context needs to be strategic and carefully measured, not just about achieving speed at all costs.
Right, speed isn't the only metric.
Definitely not. Innovation initiatives should be clearly linked to overarching business objectives, and their success should be evaluated based on factors like long-term sustainability, regulatory compliance, and importantly, demonstrable positive impact for customers, not solely on how quickly they can be launched or how disruptive they seem initially.
And it sounds like this can't just be a project confined to the tech department. It needs to be integrated across the entire organization, right?
Absolutely critical. Effective innovation requires buy-in and close collaboration across all relevant parts of the organization. That includes operations, compliance, legal, the various business units. Everyone needs to be involved.
Why is that so important?
Well, it helps to mitigate potential risks early on, and it ensures that new initiatives are actually aligned with the overall strategic goals of the institution, not just some isolated experiment. Innovation efforts that are siloed within a single department are far more likely to encounter obstacles or, frankly, fail to deliver real value.
That makes sense. Clearly defining what constitutes both success and failure from the outset also seems like a critical lesson here.
Oh, hugely important. Without clearly established metrics for success and failure, it becomes very difficult to make informed decisions about when to continue investing in an initiative and, equally important, when to pivot or, cut your losses.
Avoid that good money after bad scenario.
Precisely. This clarity helps to avoid the perception of aimless experimentation and allows for more data-driven decision-making, not just gut feelings or chasing trends.
And transparent communication with both internal teams and external stakeholders is clearly essential throughout this whole process.
Well, yeah, openness and transparency are vital. Sharing not only the successes, but also the key learnings from projects that don't achieve their initial goals helps to build trust, both internally and externally.
Even sharing the failures constructively.
Especially the failures. It fosters a more mature and realistic understanding of the challenges and opportunities associated with digital transformation. It shows that the organization is committed to learning and adapting, not just sweeping things under the rug.
So while JPMorgan Chase's fail-fast experiment may have had its share of bumps in the road, maybe some high-profile stumbles, it doesn't mean they've abandoned the pursuit of innovation altogether.
Oh, not at all. Let's be clear, JPMorgan Chase remains a major force in banking technology. They still invest enormous amounts and are leaders in many areas. Their journey simply serves as a valuable reminder, a case study, really, that successful innovation in highly regulated industries like finance demands a thoughtful and nuanced approach. It requires careful blending.
Blending what exactly?
Blending the agility and experimentation you might see in a startup with the rigor, the governance, and the caution that's rightly expected of a leading, systemically important financial institution.
Got it. So to bring it all together, we've explored how JPMorgan Chase's adoption of a fail-fast approach, really driven by the imperative for digital transformation in the competitive landscape, led to both initial progress and some significant challenges. The inherent tensions between a startup-inspired culture and the realities of a large, regulated bank manifested in things like uneven adoption internally, major regulatory considerations, and serious questions surrounding the return on investment.
Yep, all true.
Ultimately, their experience really underscores the critical importance of finding the right equilibrium, That balance between agile innovation and robust governance, tailoring strategies to the specific organizational context, and maintaining open communication with all stakeholders involved.
Exactly. The drive to innovate is crucial, absolutely vital today. But in industries where risk has significant implications, it requires a particularly deliberate and well-considered strategy. You can't just wing it.
Well put. And on that note, here's a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. Reflecting on the complexities we've discussed today, how can other well-established organizations, maybe your own, in similarly regulated or risk-sensitive sectors, effectively cultivate innovation without incurring disproportionate costs or eroding the trust they've carefully built over years?
Hmm.
It really boils down to finding that delicate but crucial balance, doesn't it? Something to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.